I've got to say, I feel so bad for Damian Lillard. I just feel increasingly sorry for the man who, year in and year out for 9 seasons, has carried the Portland Trailblazers to a playoff berth, somebody that's carried the load offensively for multiple seasons, and for a player that seemingly gets little to no help from his organization at times. To see him continuously get bounced from the first and second round of the NBA playoffs is hard to watch because he's such a talented player. He's probably my favorite player to watch, apart from Kyrie Irving or Stephen Curry. I'm a little bit partial to flashy guards, I suppose. He's a tremendous player to watch. He's an offensive superstar, probably one of the most incredible offensive players to play the game, at least in the modern era. And to see him get continuously bounced from the playoffs early on, and apart from the 2018-2019 season where they made it to the Western Conference Finals and they got rolled by the Golden State Warriors, apart from that one year, it's been nothing but disappointment for Damian Lillard, and you feel like by now he should be having more success, and it's hard to watch in that aspect. You feel bad for the man. He posted an Instagram post, a very cryptic message, a Nipsey quote saying basically, how long must I stay dedicated? How long must I be loyal? It's getting to that point where it's in the back of his head, how long do I put up with this? Also, the Portland Trailblazers and head coach Terry Stotts parting ways. Very nice way of saying that they fired Terry Stotts. 9 seasons, 402 wins, 318 losses. The furthest he got, as I said, was the Western Conference Finals in 2018-2019, where they got clobbered by the Golden State Warriors before the Warriors lost to the Raptors in the finals. In a league in which stars are consistently and increasingly forcing their will on the franchise and taking control of their careers, players like Anthony Davis, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Jimmy Butler. On the other side of the coin, there is Damian Lillard, who is the one superstar that has remained loyal to the team that drafted him and has not abandoned ship one time. Has not considered it, and he's been consistently paying for it with first-round outs in the playoffs. You could argue, well, what about Steph? Steph has not abandoned the Warriors, even though they've fallen on tough times recently. Stephen Curry has had no reason to want to jump ship, like Damian Lillard would have the reason to jump ship considering how little help he has gotten from the Portland Trailblazers at times. Dame should want out of Portland, and it saddens me to say that because I feel bad for Portland too, to some degree. It's a small market team that isn't an inviting destination for stars to play for, despite Portland being a kooky and interesting city. I really enjoy Portland. And it also happens to be in a Western Conference that has consistently, for the past 10 or 15 years, been the stronger conference to play in. It's extremely difficult to get through. Portland is also one of the more injury-prone teams in the league, so Trailblazer fans, I get it. Before you get on my case about injuries, I get it. It's not a star destination for players to want to go to, even though it's a great city. It's a small market team, not necessarily the one place that stars are like, I don't want to go play there. It's difficult for teams like that, and it will always be difficult in that aspect. So I do have some sympathy for the Portland Trailblazers. However, that doesn't excuse the fact that the Trailblazers front office has consistently let down Damian Lillard by not getting him any substantial help in a league in which you can no longer win with one star on your roster. It's possible. I would consider the Miami team to make the playoffs, the finals last season, to be one of those teams in which Jimmy Butler is the only star. Bam Adebayo, rising star. Tyler Hero played well. Duncan Robinson. But the only true star on that team was Jimmy Butler, but that team had tremendous chemistry. It's possible for you to win and only have one star, but it is extremely difficult, and I think you saw that again with Miami this year. So it's possible for you to win with one star, but preferably you would have 2 or 3, and I think that's pretty evident with what's going on with Damian Lillard and the Trailblazers in Portland. You need to have strong chemistry as a team if you're going to win with only one superstar, and the Trailblazers have never seemed to have that chemistry for reasons I'll explain in a moment. And after watching the end of the Trailblazers season this year against the Denver Nuggets, they were out of the first round again earlier this week. I was genuinely curious as to how the Blazers have built their team since they drafted Lillard in 2012. Is it really that big of an issue? Because it's obvious to everybody except the Blazers front office, apparently, that Dame needs another superstar. I wanted to share my findings with you and kind of tell you what my research found, and hopefully you can form your own opinion as well. The first thing that I saw was a weird draft history. Not necessarily a bad drafting history, but a weird one to be sure. The Blazers drafted Damian Lillard in 2012, along with Will Barton and Myers Leonard. That's a very solid draft. 2012 was by far, the best draft year that they've had since drafting Damian Lillard, and that was the year that they drafted Damian Lillard. Since then, however, the Trailblazers have not utilized their picks very well, and a majority of the picks that they did have, they have traded away on draft day, which isn't too uncommon of a practice in the NBA, but I feel like it's extremely high for a small market team who would rely more on the draft than anything else, because as I stated earlier, it's hard to get free agents to come to Portland. It's not that attractive of a city, even though it is, as I said, a great city. So, since 2012, the Portland Trailblazers have drafted CJ McCollum in 2013. In 2014, they had no picks. 2015, they drafted Rondé Hollis Jefferson, but traded him away to Brooklyn. Effectively, again, no picks. 2016, no picks. 2017, they traded away both first-round picks to Sacramento, and in return got Zach Collins and Caleb Swanigan. Zach Collins is a decent player, but he cannot stay on the court. He's incredibly injury prone, so it's hard to say what his true value is. 2018, they drafted Anthony Simons, or is it Simmons? I can't quite recall, who is developing but appears to be a solid rotational player. They did get the rights to Gary Trent Jr. in this draft as well. 2019, Nasir Little. 2020, traded away the first-round pick and drafted C.J. Ellaby. Their best draft selection was C.J. McCollum all the way back in 2013. Again, 2013, that's a long time considering now we're in 2021. Since then, Portland has traded away 4 of their first-round picks on draft day and have not had any picks in 3 of those drafts. The pieces that they have drafted have either not stayed on the court or have been bench players at best. Anthony Simons is one with the most potential. I can't tell if it's Simmons or Simons. It says it's spelled like Simons, but I'm going to maybe guess and say that it's Simmons. I'm pretty sure it's Simmons, actually, so apologies to him for that. So that's kind of a weird draft over the past 9 seasons for the Trailblazers. They didn't have a lot of picks for a team that would rely more on picks considering it's a small market team. And the picks that they have, they've had the tendency to trade away for other people or just trade away for cash incentives to begin with. So when we get to the free agency and trading side of things, here's where a lot of my criticism for the Blazers comes from, if there is any criticism to be had. Portland has 2 main problems. 1, they think CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard are enough when they're not. And 2, they cycle through supporting players like crazy. Firstly, I think it's become abundantly clear that CJ McCollum is not the number 2 guy on a championship contending team. He would be a number 3 at best. CJ McCollum is to Portland what Chris Middleton is to Milwaukee. It's a very similar player dynamic. He excels in situations in which he can be a number 2 scorer, but he is not forced to be a number 2 scorer. He'll show you flashes of brilliance, but he is at his core a number 3 guy when it gets down to it. The biggest thing for me, however, is the realization when looking through all of their transactions, and I'm sure I'm missing some of it. Some of it is probably missing in some regard, but looking through the list of transactions, I came to a realization that Portland cycles through a lot of supporting cast members, guys that can be number 3 or number 4 guys, but are really just there to enhance and play off your stars. And at the frequency in which Portland trades these players away, it's impossible for there to be any kind of consistent chemistry, and some of these trades are for players that are not good or useful. Portland has the bad tendency to trade sideways a lot, and by trading sideways, I mean trading for players that are of equal value, but they're not that much better than the players that you're giving away. They trade sideways a lot. They don't normally get better with their trades, and that's weird for a team that trades as often as the Portland Trailblazers do. And it's been that way since pretty much LaMarcus Aldridge left in free agency in 2015, that I feel like they've been cycling through a lot of players to try and find that number 3 and number 4 guy, and they just haven't found that person. Listen to all the names that have come through Portland that are good rotational pieces but not stars. I have a long list here. Robin Lopez, 1 year. Will Barton was drafted by the Portland Trailblazers, played 3 years, traded in 2015. Aaron Aflalo, 1 year. Nicholas Batum, 7 years, but traded in 2015, so only 3 years with Damian Lillard. Mason Plumlee, 1.5 years, traded midseason 2016. Mo Harkless, 4 years, not really impactful. Yusef Nurkic, 5 years. Gary Trent Jr., barely 2 years, spent time in G League, traded with Rodney Hood. Rodney Hood, 3 years, but barely played the first two. Hassan Whiteside, 1 year. Trevor Ariza, half a season. Trevor Ariza was passed around like a blunt last year. Carmelo Anthony, 2 seasons, verge of retirement. Seth Curry, 1 season. Robert Covington, 1 season. Norman Powell, half a season. Enes Kanter, half a season. I'm sure I'm missing more, not to mention guys like Evan Turner and Kent Bazemore that were in Portland for a brief period of time as well. It's not all bad, okay? I don't want to make this seem like a doomsday scenario. These aren't all bad players, but at the frequency in which they play for the team and then they're shipped off in a trade maybe 1 or 2 seasons later, they're not... I guess it goes back to the kind of saying that they're not trading up. The Portland Trailblazers are not trading up in quality. They go sideways a lot. They kind of just shuffle in all these rotational pieces that, sure, they may be good glue players, but they have nothing to hold together. You know what I'm trying to say? It's not the worst situation, but they're not also not the best players. There are no star players. They take no big swings. They're all safe trades for rotational pieces that they trade away a few seasons later for another player of the same caliber. And that's the issue. It's the trading sideways. It's not a bad thing that Portland are active traders. Plenty of teams are active. I'm not knocking the Portland Trailblazers for being active. I'm knocking them for trading sideways. From the trades I've gone over, a lot of the trades are sideways trades. And I think the one that's going to be in the recent mind of people is going to be Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood for Norman Powell. Portland Trailblazers fans, tell me, let me know, was Norman Powell really that worth it that you trade away Gary Trent Jr., who is hitting his stride? It's his third season in the league. He's performing well, 15 points per game if I remember correctly. Sure, you want to trade while they're hot, but he is probably one of the more consistent players that the Portland Trailblazers have drafted in recent memory. He gets good. You trade him away for Norman Powell. Was he really that much of an upgrade over Gary Trent Jr.? Not to mention that you also traded away Rodney Hood in that trade as well. Let me know, Portland Trailblazers fans, was Norman Powell really that worth it? Yusef Nurkic is the longest tenured player apart from Lillard and McCollum, I believe. I can't think of anybody else. Yusef Nurkic traded with Mason Plumlee in a trade with Denver. And he's been good, but he kind of got bullied by his former teammate Nikola Jokic in the series that just wrapped up. So Yusef Nurkic not only has some injury problems, but he kind of got bullied defensively. He's good offensively, but that's about it. The Blazers need to make a swing at somebody big, maybe somebody like Karl Anthony Towns, because right now they run the risk of losing Dame and going into what could be another long-term rebuild unless they stop trading sideways and try and go after a big fish. Because again, small market team, it's hard to get free agents to willingly come there. There needs to be some incentive, otherwise you need to be doing some good GMing to try and trade and get yourself a contending team. Because I'm tired of seeing Damian Lillard, put his effort into everything. 55-point, overtime performance in a loss during that series with the Denver Nuggets. I feel bad for Damian Lillard. He's an incredible offensive talent, a top 5, top 10 player in the league, but consistently the Trailblazers aren't giving him enough help. He needs another star there, and that's not a knock on Damian Lillard. Granted, if this was in the early 2000s, having another star on the team would be, not necessary, but definitely helpful. Now we're into an era in which 2 or 3 stars are needed to win a championship. Damian Lillard needs some help. The Portland Trailblazers need to stop trading sideways and go after a big fish, because you can trade rotational pieces all you want, but CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard just aren't enough in this case. So that's basically what I found in my research. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I don't want to completely knock the Portland Trailblazers because they have done some good things. And again, a lot of it is that Portland just appears to have a bad injury bug. They've had a lot of great draft choices pre-Lillard that just did not work out because of injury, and you want to talk about like Derek Jones Jr., Zach Collins, some of those guys that came in, got hurt. It's unfortunate And definitely the injuries, if they weren't there, they had helped the Trailblazers, but there's a lot of sideways training for rotational pieces, and I feel like if they're not going to go after a big star, they need to try and find some rotational pieces that work well with Dame and with McCollum to try and get that glue to stick so they can move past the first or second round. Hey folks, thank you so much for listening to this segment from the Hard-Headed Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this segment, make sure that you drop a like on the video and a comment. It helps me out a bunch. And if you're interested in watching more segments like this from the show after the show has been completed, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should listen to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video. My name is Nick Ryan, and I will see you all again very soon.